The Director of the Center of Excellence for Stability Police Units, Brigadier General Giuseppe De Magistris, will now deliver the opening address.
Good afternoon and good morning from those on the other side of the pond. So thank you so much. Welcome to the COESPU. We are just slightly changing the program, so now I will give the floor to General Riccardo Galletta, the Carabinieri Deputy Commander. But let me thank first and foremost General Galletta to be here, as well as General Stefanizzi. Thank you, sir, for being here. He's the Carabinieri Interregional Headquarters Commanding General. Il prefetto di Vicenza, grazie eccellenza, Dottor Salvatore Caccamo, General Giuseppe De Liso, who is the Commanding General of the Legion, as well as the Deputy Mayor of the City of Vicenza, Dr. Isabella Sala. My gratefulness goes also to the Carabinieri Provincial Commander and the Guardia di Finanza Provincial Commander, Cosmo and Giuseppe. Thank you for being here. And to the other authorities present here, as well as the Colonel Joe Bruel, the soon-to-be Deputy Director of the COESPU in a couple of months. Welcome here. And to my staff. So thank you for organizing this event. Thank you also to the Pigafetta students from the Liceo of Vicenza. We are very grateful and honored of your presence. Sir, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to everybody. Distinguished authorities, dear guests, on behalf of the Carabinieri Commander, General Luzzi, I'm very delighted to convey to all of you my warmest greetings and to underline the huge relevance and the preeminent importance dedicated by the Carabinieri General Headquarters to the training as well as to the doctrinal development and research activities conducted within the framework of the Vicenza Stability Policing Hub. Please allow me to express my deepest gratitude to the US Department of State for its strong and long-lasting commitment in upholding, as a strategic partner, the endeavors of the Center of Excellence for the Stability Police Units, thanks to its Global Peace Operations Initiative, today represented by Mrs. Jennifer Pulliam. Moreover, we are grateful to the Commissioner Yun Tan, UN Deputy Police Advisor, for his participation, which underscores the crucial partnership between the COESPU and the United Nations Department of Peace Operations, consecrated in the 2007 aide-mémoire, in the Memorandum of Understanding signed in 2010, and renewed in the updated Cooperation Action Point of 2018. Indeed, the COESPU general objective is to prepare qualified personnel to serve effectively in peace operations under the aegis of the United Nations by rigorously adhering to its core values, principles, standards, and norms. My sincere thanks go also to the Honorable Professor Francesco Strazzari, specialized in peace and conflict studies at the School of Advanced Studies in Pisa, who will enrich this ceremony with his Lectio Magistralis on the international order challenged new conflicts and uncertain scenarios. And to Professor Giulio Bartolini from the Roma Tre University, Director of the International Disaster Law Courses, with the patronage of the International Federation of the Red Cross and the International Institute of Humanitarian Law of Sanremo. We regrettably shall admit that nowadays many regions of the world are presenting major multifaceted challenges to the security of the international community. Consequently, there is a tremendous need for equipping the peacekeepers with high-level knowledge, skills, and competencies in order to ensure the highest performance standards in delivering on the mandates in the new demanding scenarios. It is in this context that, to enable the COESPU to play a pivotal role in the advancement of the formation and the doctrinal development in the field of stability policing, the Carabinieri General Headquarters has strongly encouraged and sustained the partnership and cooperation with national and international universities and research centers. Therefore, I'm extremely glad to commend the following 19 cooperation agreements signed by COESPU since 2021, mainly with the universities of Padova, Udine, Trento, Torino, Roma Tre, Teramo, Cagliari, Messina, Bolzano, Trieste, Guglielmo Marconi of Rome, Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore of Milan, John Hopkins University of Bologna, Ca' Foscari of Venice, Sant'Anna from Pisa, Shields di Padova, John Cabot from Rome, American University of Rome, as well as with the SIOI, the International Society for International Organizations. These agreements promoted fruitful and mutually beneficial collaboration in the didactical and research activities, with exchange of lectures, dissemination of knowledge on stability policing, publication of articles, publication of international conference proceedings, and the development of 76 internship projects so far. Let us express my deep congratulations to the author of the book on responsibility regimes for international peace operations and to the 3 former interns for the high quality of their dissertations. Finally, I praise the results of last September Conference on Cultural Heritage Protection in Crisis Areas, organized by the COESPU to raise the awareness on the role of an expeditionary law enforcement capability and aimed at identifying a more proactive approach in addressing that pivotal operational framework. I trust that what we have accomplished so far and what we are planning to do in 2024 are just a springboard for the success of the years to come, with a specific view to 2025, when we will celebrate the 20th anniversary since the COESPU's foundation. I hereby declare the COESPU's 2024 academic year opened. Thank you very much for your very kind attention.
Three graduate students who have attended internship programs at COESPU and NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence will now give a short presentation of their master thesis. The first to present is Ms. Sara Germano from the University of Turin. Her thesis is titled, "In the Maelstrom of War, Child Protection from African Scenarios to the Russian Deportations in the Ukrainian War." Ms. Germano, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before starting, allow me to express my deep and sincere thanks to the Center of Excellence for Stability Policy Units and to Director Giuseppe De Magistris, who allow me to be here today. It's an honor to participate to the opening of the academic year. I also want to express my deep appreciation to the Department of Studies and Research, who welcomed me from the first moment, and a particular mention goes to Colonel Sutto, who was my my point of reference and my mentor here at COESPU. When I first came here, the topic I was given was the protection of civilians. And as I delved deeper into the subject, I came across the topic of child protection, which fascinated me from the first time. My research, entitled In the Maelstrom of War, Child Protection from African Scenarios to the Russian Deportation of the Ukrainian War, deals with the topic of abduction, that are perpetrated in two different completely scenarios. On one hand, non-international armed conflict, represented by the Democratic Republic of Congo, and on the other side, we will have the international armed conflict, represented by by Ukraine. Every year, millions of children around the world are caught up in numerous violent conflicts. Many of them are killed, injured, tortured, displaced, or even forced to join military groups. Not to mention all that boys and girls who are sexually and psychologically abused. Child protection is the prevention of and response to abuse, neglect, exploitation, and violence against children, as well as the safeguard of their physical, mental, and psychological needs in situations of armed conflict and emergencies. When we talk about children, we talk about every human being below the age of 18, and because of their lack of maturity, in need of special attention. The United Nations started to give this special attention to children in 1997, when the Children and Armed Conflict Agenda was established. Its goal is to develop a comprehensive approach for enhancing the safety and well-being of children in armed conflict scenarios, but also to fostering international cooperation to improve their protection. When discussing child protection legal framework, it is essential to mention the 4 Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols. In particular, the 4th Geneva Convention is extremely important because for the first time it granted rights to the civilians. Next step towards child protection was taken in 1989 when the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child was established, which acknowledged for the first time children's social, economical, political, and civil rights, which have been previously ignored. Regarding the efforts of the Security Council, there are 2 main resolutions that need to be mentioned, Resolution 1261 and Resolution 1612, which recognize and identified the 6 grave violations on children. Sorry, this is not my presentation. No? No? No?
It seems that we want to cut short Sarah, but it's not the case. So our
Okay,
IT
maybe.
managers, wait 1 second, we should have struggling with something. Here we are.
Okay. Okay. The 6 grave violations are killing and maiming, recruitment and use of children, sexual violence against children, abduction, attacks on schools and hospitals, and the denial of humanitarian access. Furthermore, in 2005, the monitoring and reporting mechanism was established, and it allows the collection of accurate, timely, and impartial information on grave violation against children. The focus of my research is on abduction, one of the 6 grave violations, which is strongly linked to the other violation, but it has also quickly increased in the last period. Indeed, as shown by the monitoring and reporting mechanism, between 2005 and 2020, more than 25,700 abductions were perpetrated, with an increase of the 90% in 2020. Abduction is the removal, seizure, capture, apprehension, taking or enforced disappearance of child, either temporarily or permanently, including for the purpose of any other form of exploitation of the child, and it must be perpetrated by a party to the conflict. This is a short definition of abduction, which can be applied to the 2 case studies I analyzed. For what regards the Democratic Republic of Congo, I focus my studies on the eastern region of North Kivu. And since DRC is a country where violence is highly diffused, I had to choose one armed group, which is the Allied Democratic Group. I choose this group because the Allied Democratic Forces are the main perpetrator of abduction against children in Congo, and because they are an Islamist group that was born in Uganda but established in Congo in the mid-90s. And they became one of the deadliest groups in Congo, and they are also connected with the Islamic State, which in 2019 also claimed some of the attacks perpetrated by the Allied Democratic Forces. Just to give you an idea of their violence, in 2022, out of a total of 730 children, 200 of them were abused and abducted by the Allied Democratic Forces. After being abducted, these children are recruited or used for extortion, sexual violence, torture. That means that the main purpose of this abduction is exploitative. On the other side, in Ukraine, we have a completely different dynamic. During my stay here in Vicenza, I had the chance to talk with a colonel of the Ukrainian police, and he told me his testimony about the situation in Ukraine. He told me that since the first moment when Russians came to Ukraine, they started it, as they call it, an evacuation, meaning that they started to deport children in order to save them, while the real purpose was to erase Ukrainian culture from their mind and subjugate them to Russian culture. To erase and delete the Ukrainian culture from their mind, they also started to destroy everything that has a cultural meaning for Ukrainian people. These mean churches, school, museum, everything. A data collection system by the Ukrainian government shows that in 1 year of war, at least 7,000 children were deported to Russian Federation to integrate them into Russian government's vision of national culture, history, and society. So, the monitoring and reporting mechanism, thanks to the monitoring and reporting mechanism, it is now possible to gather the information that can be used to promote international standards for child protection and have well-informed, coordinated, and effective advocacy. While in DRC, we have an exploitative purpose for abducting children, the situation in Ukraine is completely different. The systematic, deliberate, and large-scale nature of deportation of Ukrainian children and their indoctrination, along with the broader context of the Russian invasion and some public statement of the Russian state officials, strongly suggest that there is a genocide going on. The forced transfer of Ukrainian children has a grave implication for the future of Ukrainian as a national group, but also for the country itself. In conclusion, my work led me to the consideration that the sixth grave violation, and in particular abduction, can have serious consequences, not only for the children's future, but also for the future of their country. Thank you so much for the attention, and allow me to thank one more time COESPO for this occasion.
The second intern to present is Ms. Isabella Marchese from the University of Trieste. Her thesis is titled, "How can cultural heritage protection be a weapon?" Ms. Marchese, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. First, I want to thank to the director, the head of department, and the head of office, but not only, also the DSR, who I work with a lot during my internship here. And I want to thank also the Colonel Delia, Colonel Romano, and Colonel Sutto, who helped me with my thesis. The topic I've selected to write my thesis on is linked to my experience here at the COESPO. Last year, I had the opportunity to attend an international conference on preservation and culture of cultural assets in conflict zones. And today, I'm here to discuss a critical issues. As you can see from the title, it is how can cultural heritage protection be a weapon in international context? Well, it's a hard question, and I'm going to analyze it really quickly. But I'm also open to any question, maybe if not at the end of my presentation, also at the break that we have after our presentation. So, cultural heritage, as the embodiment of our shared history, tradition, and identity, bears witness to human civilization richness and diversity. In a world often marked by conflict and division, CHP emerged as a potent weapon for developing understanding, supporting peace, and establishing cross-border ties. So, cultural heritage is a mirror that reflects a community and nation identity. And it is an excellent instrument for building a sense of togetherness and belonging among people. When a community values its legacy, it cultivates a shared identity that transcends political, social, and economic division. Nations may increase their internal cohesiveness by investing in cultural heritage protection. Initial unity is a powerful weapon against divisive influence because it contributes to the formation of a collective identity based on shared values, history, and traditions. So, in this approach, CHP and CPP serve as a buffer against internal strife and a method of consolidation communal power. So, soft power and diplomacy. A political scientist, you may know, Joseph Nye, created the term soft power, and I quote, because we refer to a country's capacity to influence others via appeal and persuasion rather than coercion. It's really an important thing because cultural heritage conservation may be an essential tool in a country's soft power harmony. A country's cultural diversity becomes more desirable to global world when it actively protects and promotes it. And a nation also may create healthy international relations by exchanging cultural experience, costumes, and historical tales. So people are more open to countries that appreciate and safeguard their heritage because it fosters a sense of openness and understanding and friendliness. In my analysis, I also understood that cultural diplomacy serves as a diplomatic weapon because it allows government to form alliances and partnerships based on a mutual respect and similar values rather than only a strategic goal. Joint projects also for repair and conservation of cultural sites foster conversation and cooperation across political boundaries. Countries can discover common ground by focusing on the shared cultural resources, creating the groundwork for a larger diplomatic interaction. Furthermore, the preservation of cultural heritage can serve as a deterrent to the devastation caused by war. The deliberate destruction of cultural sites during conflict is not only a tragedy in itself, but it also erodes civilization and fabric. And I will show you how, because I've selected two main countries, two sites in my thesis, the site of Mosul and Palmyra. But before to talk about these two sites, I want to also point out the concept of counter-extremism and conflict. CHP can be also a potent weapon against extremism and violence. Conflict frequently emerge as a result of a lack of knowledge and respect for the diversity, culture, and identity. When a cultural legacy is threatened, it provides a rallying point for many populations transcending political and ideological division. So, CHP efforts may serve as a unity factor, fostering communication and collaboration among various groups, as already said. The restoration of cultural landmarks and practices can serve as a sign of resilience and optimism in crisis zones. This brings me to show you two sites, the site of Mosul and Palmyra. I chose to focus on these two significant examples. I'm pretty sure that you all know what happened in both of them, but they're really significant for my thesis. Mosul is a significant city in northern Iraq, so located on the Tigris River, and it attracted international attention when it fell under ISIS control in June 2014. The city was dubbed capital and the group's self-proclaimed caliphate. Iraqi government forces, backed by a coalition that included the US, command a military effort to retake Mosul from ISIS. One of the first actions of ISIS militants was to proclaim the statues present in the museum contrary to Islam. So we are recalling the religious foundation of iconoclasm. It's a really important point, this one, because it declares the intention to destroy the archaeological findings contained in the museum that were against a culture, but not against all the cultures. Atil al-Nuyafi, the exiled governor of Mosul, indicated that many of the antiquities, with the exception of the larger and heavier one, had previously been taken to Baghdad at the commencement of the war of the Iraq War in 2003. And at the same time, Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, called an emergency meeting in United Nations Security Council to discuss, and I quote, protecting Iraq's cultural heritage as an integral part of maintaining the country's security. The war, in the end, ended with ISIS' defeat in the city in July 2017. For what regards Palmyra, it is also well-preserved ancient city in the central Syria, recognized for its historical value and the well-preserved ruins. It was taken by ISIS in 2015 and raised worries about the preservation of its historical treasure. Fortunately, the total reconquest of Palmyra arrived in 2016, so the damage were really pretty much limited. Rather than in Mosul. Okay. What I want you to remember from my presentation today is that it is important to note that while cultural heritage can be wielded as a tool in international relations, many organizations and individuals work earnestly to protect and preserve cultural heritage for its intrinsic values and contribution to to human history. The use of cultural heritage as a weapon is generally considered unethical and often violates international agreements, as I've written here the preamble of the 1954 Hague Convention. It is also necessary to emphasize the need to develop and raise awareness about cultural property protection in order to prevent destruction and contribute to the internal mission's success. Nevertheless, additional factors are required to contribute to contribute to mission accomplishment, such as resilience, which is the ability to react to a shock, and to the utmost importance because it is the first line of defense. Nonetheless, law enforcement, interoperability, and training, all of which COESPU is attempting to advance, like the EMOT course or the International Conference on CHP held in September 2023, are one of the main points that we need to remember and to help to develop. Also, we have to develop terminology and its standardization, inventories, and digitalization. But the most thing you have to remember is that to acquire the trust of a population, it must first demonstrate respect for it. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, Ms. Lilena Petogbo from the University of Padua will present her thesis titled Weaponization of Migration, an analysis on how human beings are seen as a hybrid threat, the impact on human rights, and the possible role of stability policing. Ms. Petogbo, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished authorities and guests, good afternoon. First and foremost, allow me to thank the University of Padua for enabling their students to engage with such simulating both academic and military realities. And of course, thanks to Brigadier General De Magistris for inviting me to present my final master research, which was actually the culmination of enriching internship at the NATO Stability Center of Excellence last spring. As we delve into the heart of the matter, I wish to draw your attention to a pressuring issue which transcends both academic and military spheres, the weaponization of migration. The weaponization of migration is a coercive migration diplomacy technique which is not a novel occurrence, rather an old asymmetric game that have been played at least in the last 2 centuries as a way to influencing migration flows in order to advance political, economic, and military demands. Okay, examining the statistics, since the inception of the 1951 Geneva Convention, we have been witnessing over 70 instances so far with a success rate of over 75%. This success is rooted in perceived vulnerability of liberal democracies, which sees the dichotomy between being on the one hand bound by obligation, in this case, refugee protection laws, and on the other hand, a form of internal opposition, which is growing more and more due to rooted in xenophobia and nationalism, and creating a fertile terrain for revisionist forces, finding their demands often satisfied at the detriment of human rights. The most recent case is the Belarusian crisis, which involved the European eastern borders, where Belarus strategically lured and smuggled migrants from Middle East, Africa, and surprisingly also Latin America into Europe as a provocative response to European sanctions linked to fraudulent elections and oppressive government actions. But what was the European response? Well, the 3 main concerned countries, which were Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, responded by declaring a state of emergency, erecting kilometers of barbed fences, and actually implementing, albeit controversially, pushbacks, a gross violation of Article 33.1 of the 1951 Geneva Convention. And from an institutional standpoint, the European Commission proposed yet an unsuccessful regulation on the instrumentalization of migration, which was nothing than adding a new way to derogate, to implement a derogatory mechanism from the asylum acquis, already existing asylum acquis, which shows a will from the European institution, especially from some nationalist governments, to avoid their obligation related to refugee and migrants' rights. These intricate landscapes lead us to the realm of hybrid threats, particularly lawfare, the manipulation of existing legal frameworks with the aim of influencing the observance of international law, and in this particular case, refugee law, to potentially lead non-compliant states to face legal procedures before, as in this case, human rights courts. Simultaneously, however, we have to find a way to lay foundations for deterrence, to make revisionist forces understand that they put themselves as potential criminal acts responsible, and at the same time, the blurry line between human smuggling and human trafficking can lead to huge and intense consequences on the international landscape. In response to this complex scenario, I propose considering stability policing as a bridge between upholding human rights and utilizing both military and civilian capacities while countering hybrid threats, since its ability to prevent through training and supporting local forces, as well as its role in mitigating and providing deterrent presence, position it as an effective counterplayer by installing an approach aiming to avoid excessive dismantlement of human rights principles. Thank you for your kind attention.
We continue now with the presentation of Dr. Eleonora Branca's book titled Responsibility Regimes for International Peace Operations. Dr. Branca is a postdoctoral research fellow in international law at Roma III University and adjunct professor of international law at the University of Verona. Dr. Branca has a long-standing collaboration with COESPU as guest lecturer on international humanitarian law and human rights law, and has authored numerous academic publications on the law of international responsibility, peace operations, state immunity, protection of civilians, international humanitarian law, and new technologies. The presentation will be introduced and moderated by Professor Giulio Bartolini. Professor Bartolini is a full professor of international law at Roma III University, where he is also director of the International Humanitarian Law Legal Clinic. President of the Scientific Committee, International Humanitarian Law Section of the Italian Red Cross, is also a member of the IHL National Committee established by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Professor Bartolini was awarded the Serge Lazarev Prize by the NATO Allied Command Operations Legal Office for excellence in legal service. Recently, he has been appointed by the Italian Ministry of Defense as coordinator of the working group established for drafting the military manual on international law applicable to military missions. Dr. Branca is also a member of this group. Dr. Branca, Professor Bartolini, the floor is yours.
Many thanks for this kind of introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Also very grateful for COESPU and Carabinieri for this kind invitation. I'm very pleased to be here with General Galletta and General De Magistris. And I also like to say hello to General Raggi, with whom we are working together in this new effort, a working group in order to elaborate this manual on international law for military operations. So today we are going to discuss a volume recently published by Eleonora Branca, Responsibility Regimes for International Peace Operations. And indeed, the idea of the volume is centered around to analyze international law implication of a series of activities with regard to which we can identify different regime of responsibility. And basically, I would like to start with a series of facts which highlight how the activities carried out by peace operation by different actors in missions abroad might also raise a series of issues dealing with the protection of civilians and also a series of issues in relation to remedies to provide to civilians who might be affected by the activities of such actors. Just let's remember a series of events which prompted a series of debate in the humanitarian sphere and among legal scholars, but also in international relations and in the debates of international organizations. So, if we discuss about responsibility and their link with international peace operation, we can start, for instance, from the Srebrenica events. So, if all of us are very familiar with Srebrenica, which was a safe area established under the auspices of the UN mission in Bosnia, UNPROFOR at the time, in 1995, which was created specifically by UN Security Council resolution to provide protection for civilians. And then, of course, we know how, on the contrary, the Srebrenica enclave fell in the hands of Mladic troops, basically the army commander of the Republika Srpska forces, in an operation which, of course, raised a series of serious questions, mainly for the fate of the individuals, Bosnian Muslims, who died there. An amount of 7,000 people lost their life there as a consequence of the lack of protection provided by UNPROFOR in this area, bringing to the first genocide on Europe after World War II. Then, just a few minutes ago, we heard from Ms. Germano issues dealing with child protection. Child protection are also relevant for the activities of international peace operation, not only because they are the first provider or a support for local actors in providing protection, but on several occasions we have been faced with a series of, for instance, sexual exploitation and abuse also in relation to children. We know how the issue of sexual exploitation and abuse raised, particularly in the early 2000s, after the publication of a series of reports carried out by the UN High Commission for Refugees and the NGO Save the Children, who showed a series of systematic abuses of UN-led and UN-authorized peace operation, particularly in Africa, but also in other regions, involving different actors in the peace operation. It could be the case of the military staff, the civilian staff, the local staff, working for this UN-led or UN-authorized peace operation. Could be the case of scandals dealing with sex for food. So basically, unfortunately, trying to take advantage of sexual abuses in order to get some commodities, some extra basic goods by members of peace operation. Or again, linked with the point of Ms. Gerban about the protection of child protection, the phenomenon of peacekeeper babies is quite well known and very well analyzed in literature. So basically, the children born from these abuses. Again, we can have other issues linked more with operational activities of the peace operation. We had in the Balkans cases of excessive use of force by UNMIK police in Kosovo on some instances, or on the contrary, we had cases of contamination of areas in light of, as a follow-up of military activities, particularly affecting, for instance, some internal displaced person living in a camp managed by UNMIK, again in Kosovo, which brought to the attention reports of hundreds of victims, unfortunately, facing with permanent health damages due to contamination of the area. More recently, Haiti, of course, one of the most significant events was in relation to the cholera epidemic outbreak, which was related to the MINUSTAT operation 2011, which of course brought a significant number of individuals, in terms of thousands of them, suffering from the cholera epidemic outbreak, in light of the reckless conduct of the UN operation in the area and the management of waste and other instances. And finally, again, very common and also not related to a specific scenario, but present in any peace operation, is the management of loss and damages, personal injuries, or deaths even, which could be linked with the ordering operation of emission. Could be a matter of road damages. It could be a matter of damages to property carried out as a result of the activities carried out by such missions in the area. And we got examples also in terms of mechanisms to manage them for the Balkans with IFORS 4, or in Afghanistan, again, also managed through NATO and the different contributing countries, also bringing to the case of example like ex gratia payments and the management of such claims made by the civilian population in the area. So we have a series of problems to deal with. It's not a matter of that in all peace operations such legal problems will arise, but it could be possible that these legal problems could be present. And in this regard, these scenarios, these events, which are real events, of course, interact with international law issues, international law aspects, interact with how the international organization, the contributing countries, or the local states should manage such events. And in this regard, the volume provides a comprehensive analysis of the different responsibility regime that international law provides in this case. So we can frame this event through different legal terms, like international responsibility of states or international organization. We can use the term accountability or liability, as each of them bring to a different scenario in terms of legal duties of the actors and also mechanisms available for the victims. So you have used, Dr. Branca, these three terms, which sometimes overlaps, which sometimes have some similarities, but of course we will be interested to know a bit more about this, why you use this term, and also in general terms, the term of art, the specific regime, even in your title. So what is the difference of these terms? Please.
Thank you very much, Professor Bartolini. Just before addressing the question, let me express my gratitude for the invitation to present my book on the occasion of the inauguration of the academic year of this prestigious institution, to COESPU's Director General Giuseppe De Magistris, to the Head of Department, Colonel Nicola Bianchi, and to all the staff for the organization of the event. Thank you also to Professor Bartolini for having accepted to moderate this book presentation, and my greetings to all distinguished authorities and guests. So now, addressing the question, what are the features of these three regimes, and what is the value, the merit in framing issues of responsibility in peace operation throughout this lens? So I would start from international responsibility. So international responsibility can be defined under international law as that legal relationship that arises from the breach of an international obligation that is attributable to a state or to an international organization in the absence of circumstances precluding wrongfulness. So this is certainly the sounder branch of international law that is well studied and examined, and where some customary rules have emerged. especially thanks to the codification effort carried out by the UN International Law Commission with the articles on the responsibility of states on the one hand of 2001 and the responsibility of international organization of 2011. So if we focus on the mechanisms that are available when violations of international law occur in peace operation, under this regime, we should point at the crucial role that domestic court plays. Which domestic courts? The domestic court of troop contributing countries to which the international violation is allegedly attributed. A certain role can be played also to Regional Court of Human Rights, or especially we've seen cases decided by the European Court of Human Rights that sits in Strasbourg, clearly for those states that are member to these international instruments. So if we want to make an example taken from the practice of UN peace operations, Professor were referring to the sadly famous event of Srebrenica, the Srebrenica massacre. In this case, we have a series of streams of case law decided by Dutch courts. So this is the most significant group of cases where Dutch courts, especially the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, adjudicated, and indeed very limited, but it did, adjudicated some limited responsibility, international responsibility of the Netherlands for violating the right to life of those who were left behind when the UNPROFOR Dutch battalion evacuated the Potokari compound in 1995. And the last case was adjudicated in July 2019, before, as I was saying, the Supreme Court of the Netherlands. So in this case, we have an international law obligation that is breached, the right to life, attributed to a state organ, so the Dutch battalion. Therefore, the international responsibility is attributed to the state. The state is adjudicated before its own domestic courts. As you probably recall, no responsibility at all was adjudicated as it concerned the UN, the United Nations, because of the absolute immunity of the organizations before domestic courts that is stipulated in the 1946 General Convention. So any assessment on the international responsibility of the UN is precluding. Now moving quickly to another notion that is crucial to the analysis, that is accountability. So accountability is utilized in international law generally to describe the need for international organizations. It can be also state, but mainly international organization, to account for the exercise of their powers. Quite interestingly, the concept does not translate in many languages. For example, it does not translate in Italian, literally, but it can be understood as a form of non-legal, but rather a political form of responsibility, or as theorized by outstanding scholars, as a form of self-control and self-regulations that international organizations themselves established to counterbalance the growing exercise of their powers. Interesting mechanisms established by international organizations in peace operations under these regimes are certainly those creating during territorial administrations by the UN. I refer in particular to the UNMIK Ombudsperson, to the UNMIK Human Rights Advisory Panel, later by the EULEX Human Rights Review Panel. To some extent, these experiences were also relevant for the territorial administration of East Timor. So these mechanisms are called, in my analysis, as active accountability mechanisms, because they allow individuals to file complaints, individual complaints or collective complaints somehow, to raise the international responsibility of these organizations. But why are not talking about international responsibility, but rather to accountability here? Because we have an assessment by these bodies, but there are no legal consequences that follows from this assessment of potential breaches. And also, we do not have a court, but we just have these mechanisms that have to be established by the international organizations. If international organizations do not want to establish such mechanisms, we will have no mechanisms at hand available for potential victims. So, as you see, it highly depends on the will of international organizations to control themselves as this form of self-control. Also, in this regard, trust fund for victims may have an impact, but maybe we can discuss this at a later stage. Now, going towards the conclusion for the description of liability, of responsibility regimes, we have liability. That is another peculiar form of responsibility. Is typically responsibility for a lawful act. So we do not have necessarily a breach of international law obligations, but we do have damages, as those damages that were mentioned before by Professor Bartolini, that damages and losses occur during the ordinary operation of a mission. Most of you are very familiar with these mechanisms. They can be UN local review boards, or they can be claims systems, for example, established by NATO at headquarter levels during KFOR or ISAF operation, but also established by contributing countries in the same mission. So they go in parallel. And on a very last note on these, I would like to stress that very often they tend to overlap these mechanisms, so the regimes, and the way in which they overlap and operate in a complementary manner is very influential on whether they provide for an effective remedy or not. And I hope we can demonstrate in the following part how they complement each other. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so thanks, Eleonora, for this first point to be raised. So you have identified basically the existence of 3 regimes. So we say, okay, there are more options available for the civilians, victims of potential damages or losses or whatever. But you also identify in your volume the existence of a responsibility gap. So basically you try to demonstrate how the different regime in place sometimes could not provide a proper remedy by troop contributing countries or by the international organization. So why do you think that such international regimes are ineffective to some extent?
Thank you. So the reasons of these responsibility gap in peace operation are manifold. And we probably need an entire afternoon to examine all of them. I will signal out what I consider in my analysis the most relevant. These are certainly the immunities of international organizations that I've mentioned earlier, attribution issues, who is actually the responsible entity, the UN, regional international organizations, troop contributing countries, both. Again, the ineffectiveness of most active accountability mechanism, what I was referring earlier. And when it comes to third-party claims, they prove to be ineffective quite often because of the excessive limitations that are imposed on their functioning and especially on the receivability of claims, so on the type of claims that can be brought. before this claim system. And this is cross-cutting issues actually that apply to all regimes. There are inner complexities in dealing with mass claims. So when we have cases like a pattern of systemic abuses, sexual exploitation and abuses in so many missions that is touching so many people, or when the UN is responsible for the cholera epidemic outbreak and people affected by the disease are basically countless, and the effects of the events are so long lasting, it becomes extremely difficult to address from a procedural perspective. So how do you receive so many claims? But also from a conceptual, a substantial point of view, how would you redress so many people? How would you possibly offer something that may be called an effective remedy vis-a-vis such grave violations? So in these cases, Transfound may offer some options, but still we can also imagine that states and international organizations faces budgetary constraints. So it's not easy to offer and provide compensation. Also, coming back to the Mothers of Srebrenica cases I was mentioning earlier, when the responsibility of the state was eventually adjudicated in the last case of the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, the state had to establish a trust fund to distribute the compensation that was awarded by the court. So there are numerous issues to be taken into account to offer a proper, effective remedy and reparation.
So basically, it's quite clear that regardless of their existence, which is also dependent on the willingness of the international organization or the contributing states to set up such mechanisms, because as you said, they could not be taken for granted. Their existence and the possibility to operate is also based on a series of even basic elements like the provision of fund and also the provision of experts to manage such mechanisms, which could be a mixture of, for instance, personnel part of the armed forces. So there are component and members of such, for instance, claims commission, which are basically officer of the army and the armed forces involved in the same military operation, or sometimes they even rely on some external experts to manage such litigation and claims. We still face a series of challenges in this regard. So to some extent, the situation that you analyze has definitely improved in the most recent years. So basically we can record a more specific attention by the contributing states as well as by the international organization which have provided the mandate for such operation to set up a responsibility regime, to set up a series of measures to address such events, even if, of course, we also know how international law could also be a very helpful shield for them. The example of the UN claiming and obtaining immunity in front of the thousands of claims brought by victims of the cholera case in the US courts and in other scenarios was paramount of basically the opportunity of the international organization to use international law in order not to face entirely the consequence of the event, because it was a massive event with major costs which would not be basically qualified as possible to be faced by the UN. And people familiar with the case might remember how the the letter of reply by the UN legal office to the US court which was dealing with the case was one-page document. They simply say we rely on a specific provision of the UN Convention on Immunities, and that's all. You need to close the case. You could not go ahead in front of a case which would have been a matter of millions of damage to be covered by the UN. So also in this case, it's true that to some extent, the international organization, as also the contributing states, are paying more attention. The number of such mechanisms has definitely increased, and maybe we could have time, we can also explore later on a specific scenario of attention paid even by the UN Security Council recently on mechanisms to settle such claims, also for police operation, as we can discuss later on. But still, some improvements could be present. So, what do you think could be the most relevant improvements to be adopted in this area? What should be done by international organizations, by contributing states to guarantee rule of law protection through their activities also in this regard?
So, again, as the problems are so numerous, the attempt in filling the existing gaps are also manifold and extremely complex. What I would like to point at is the need to undertake this multi-layer approach, this complementary approach in the improvement efforts. That is to say that it is not enough to, for example, to claim that the UN has to waive its own immunity in certain cases. It's not enough to claim that states should improve liability mechanisms, but all these efforts should be undertaken together so that the improvement of each responsibility regimes and each mechanism can reinforce the others. But focusing on some improvements that can be actually suggested or even advocated, I would like to focus on two aspects. So starting from liability, from the liability regimes and from claims systems that are probably most, those that are most familiar to the audience here. So I think that some interventions starting from the UN system, some interventions should definitely address the very outdated and opaque UN policy on third-party claims, on what are called third-party claims. How to do that? Well, we need an engagement from the political sphere, because these documents are adopted by the UN General Assembly upon the proposal of the Secretary General. But these are very often administrative documents, as Resolution 15247 of 1998, for example, dealing with temporal and financial limitation of third-party claims. But also I'm referring to the UN model SOFA. These documents can be revised by the UN General Assembly with the support of the Secretary General without such a too excessive effort. What type of reform do we need? First of all, I believe we need to intervene on the so-called private law character exception. The private law character exception, as you may know, bars the receivability of claims. So basically says these type of claims cannot be receivable by UN local review boards. But what are these type of claims? When is a claim of private law character? Well, we don't really know, because there is not a policy, a UN policy, there is not an interpretative guide, but the interpretation of this concept is given on a case-by-case basis by the competent offices of the UN. And the practice we can witness, we can point at, are showing, as in the case of Haiti, the professor was referring to, but also in the case of the lead contamination of internally displaced person during UNMIC administration, that very often UN offices uses this limitation to bar those claims that are mass claims, so that I have very, very numerous claimants, very numerous alleged victims, and that imply serious human rights violations, so violation of the right to health in both cases, possibly violations of the right to life on a very large scale. So with the new resolutions on the limitation, with the new model SOFA, the UN could show the goodwill to treat these problem in a more transparent way. They can show their commitment. So limitations are clearly admissible. The compensation is never full in this case. It's more an indemnization. And we know, talking about the inner limitation of mass claims. But with such a policy document that then become binding on states when the effective SOFA is stipulated, when the mission is deployed, then we may have a way better starting point. Because liability and claims are the closest mechanisms to potential victims. As you know perfectly, they are established in the same country, in the same areas where the damages or the injuries or the death occurs. They don't need legal representation, so they are very a proximity mechanisms for victims. So I believe that a significant improvement of these first mechanisms can be promising and can also highlight the will of the United Nations, if not renouncing to its immunity, but at least to counterbalancing its immunity in a significant manner. Lastly, I've mentioned accountability mechanisms like UNMIC, Human Rights Advisory Panel. So if such mechanisms will be established in the future, and maybe we will have something in the new Haiti mission, my statement, I submit that these type of mechanisms, it will be established again, they need to envisage legal consequences. So if you establish an outstanding panel made by international law scholars, by diplomats, and they find out that there have been some human rights violations, as it occurred with the Human Rights Advisory Panel, the EULEX Human Rights Review Panel, then some legal consequences should follow. Otherwise, we deprive the legal significance of these mechanisms. Even if it's not the same legal consequences, strict legal consequences under international responsibility, so we will not have compensation, a damage judgment enforceable before courts, but we will have some legal consequences, starting from, for example, from official excuses by the mission or by the special representative. No such official excuses were ever issued in the missions, in the cases I've mentioned, even though they were recommended by the mechanisms at hand. And with this I conclude, and how to do that? Well, just by changing the mandate. Every time that a mechanism like this is established, it is done so after a UN or a EU, for example, mandate. These type of mandates should include some sanctionatory powers of these. And this is my take on this.
Okay, so just to conclude, also in order to keep the time, we still have few minutes more, so I want to be sure that at the coffee break, the coffee will be there because we will not arrive there too early. We still have 10 minutes left according to the program. So, a last point. So, just to clarify, not the legal aspect. So, basically, we discussed the reason why, from a legal perspective, they should be there. But don't forget, I think, for the broader audience, how the management of such elements of responsibility, they also have strategic implication for the mission itself. So basically, in front of mission whose main aim is also to, as we sometimes say, to win the hearts and the minds of the local population, to maintain, to keep the support of the local population, the absence of effective remedy system might be a major political and military shortcoming of the same mission. So it could really alienate the support of the local population, with the final effect of increasing the risk of unsuccess for the mission itself. So that's a point that should be taken into account not only by legal scholars, which might have a specific interest on such points, but also the emphasis of the need to provide a proper remedy might have a political and military strategic implication, which sometimes looks like a bit undermined also in the discussion. But probably the need to reinforce and to guarantee as a baseline for the discussion, the need to have such system in place is nowadays more and more present. That's the reason why also your book is timely. Just let's take a final point, which might also be particularly of interest for COESPO, also because maybe COESPO might have also a role in providing some support on a very new mission authorized by the UN, which still have to start. I refer to the multinational security support mission in Haiti, which, as you know, is specifically a police operation to be carried out in Haiti by police units. It will be led by Kenya in a very strange, let me say, institutional arrangement in which basically the UN Security Council already identified the lead nation, in this case would be Kenya, for police operation, basically to provide support to the Haitian police forces in light of the massive problems of gangs and violence, organized crime in Haiti, and this mission still have to start due to challenges in set up as we know, but interesting because it will be a specific police mission led by Kenya, but also with the support of potentially other states which could provide police support as well. In this regard, if you look at the UN Security Council resolution authorizing the mission, you already identify the request by the UN Security Council to set up two separate responsibility regimes, compliance mechanisms. One is a request for the contributing states to set up some compliance overrides mechanism, and the other one is for the mission itself to set up a compliance mechanism. So what could be, let me say, your concluding remarks also on this specific mechanism for a police operation, international police operation to be carried out in Haiti, and what might be the characteristic of this mechanism once the mission will be set up?
So, at a first look of this quite complex resolution, I think we certainly can praise the attention paid by the resolution to the respect of international law in general and human rights law specifically, especially if we consider the serious violations that were committed in Haiti by the previous UN mission, so MINUSTAH. Certainly the UN is not doing it in the easiest way and in the most linear way, because we're basically moving from operation without any form of compliance mechanism, of accountability mechanism, to a mission with even two mechanisms that seems to have slightly different competences. So the one is more internal, could be more internal for state, and the other one concerns the functioning of the mission and has a peculiar attention on cases of sexual exploitation and abuses. So we definitely have to wait and see how states and this mission, if it would ever be deployed, will actually effectively implement it. So we will need somehow to wait for problems to emerge. But briefly, against the backdrop of my research, what can I suggest? That these looks very much like as accountability mechanisms. There is not really in the resolution a victim-centered approach, so they look like mechanisms for the organization for troop contributing countries themselves. And again, if this will eventually be the case when these mechanisms will be set up, if they will be set up, this may pose the same problems that I've already highlighted, of having mechanisms that have not a victim-centered approach, that have no legal consequences. So I believe that besides underlying the way in which these mechanisms will be effectively set up, a need on the remedial aspect and attention on these aspects should certainly be paid.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thought-provoking presentation for sure. We have a lot to think about it. The international rule-based order is really challenged, and the problem is the commitment of the nations. And I trust Professor Strazzari, after the break, will enlighten us. So, with your permission, sir, without further ado, we proceed for a family picture, and then a well-deserved coffee break. Thank you so much for everybody's attention to our interns. This showcases how much internship is crucial. Thank you, Sara, Isabella, Lilian. Well done, good job. And thank you to you, Professor, and Dr. Branca. So more to follow after the break, and beforehand, the picture, please. Thank you so much.
Department of State in Washington, D.C. Ms. Pulliam is the Chief of the Peace Operation Capacity Building Division and Director of the African Peacekeeping Rapid Response Partnership, APRRP, and the Global Peace Operations Initiative, GPOI. For the sake of the audience, we wish to emphasize one more time that the US Department of State is a major sponsor of COESPU through the GPOI program. The GPOI is a US government-funded security assistance program intended to promote international peace and security by reinforcing the global commitment to achieve and sustain effectiveness in UN and regional peace operations. Ms. Pulliam, over to you.
Thank you so much, General de Magistris. Yes, it's my great honor to be a part of the ceremony to mark the opening of COESPU's academic year. Of course, I wish I could be with you in beautiful Vicenza, but I'm still grateful that we're able to connect in this way. I'm joining you from Washington, D.C., where I serve as the program director for the U.S. Global Peace Operations Initiative, or GPOI. GPOI is the U.S. government's primary tool for building the capacity of international partners to contribute military and police peacekeepers to United Nations and regional peacekeeping operations. Through GPOI, the United States provides training, advisory support, equipment, infrastructure development, and other assistance to enhance the capabilities of troop police contributing countries. The United States government continues to view peacekeeping as a critical means to promote international peace and stability. And our deep commitment to peacekeeping is reflected in our significant financial contributions to peacekeeping budgets, as well as our sustained and extensive investments in peacekeeping capacity development efforts. The United States' long-standing and robust partnership with COESPU represents a critical element of this capacity building endeavor. In fact, this close collaboration dates back to the establishment of COESPU, and we're now marking our 19th year of partnership. COESPU and GPOI were born together as complementary initiatives stemming from a 2004 G8 action plan to support peace operations. Through GPOI, the United States provides funding assistance to sponsor COESPU training courses focused on UN police peacekeeping, and particularly UN-formed police units. To date, the United States has committed nearly $30 million to support COESPU's training initiatives. This partnership enables the United States to draw on Italy's deep knowledge and robust experience in the area of stability policing. Stability or formed police units play an indispensable role alongside military contingents and individual police in UN and regional peace operations. They have become vital in bridging security gaps and helping establish and maintain public order in post-conflict environments. And the importance of stability policing functions is only growing as peace operations are deployed to address an evolving set of challenges, which includes not only traditional armed groups, but organized crime, gangs, and other spoilers better suited to policing versus military solutions. The Carabinieri have a rich and successful history of preparing not only their own forces, but also those of countries around the world to carry out stability policing functions. Thus, our enduring partnerships with COESPU enable us to draw on Italy's expertise to complement and expand beyond the peacekeeping capacity building assistance the United States provides through its own personnel. I personally have worked with COESPU for more than a decade, and I would like to recognize the center's growth and evolution as both a training center and a doctrinal hub. We particularly commend COESPU's continued contributions to shape and develop UN police doctrine and guidance, as well as UN police training materials. For example, in recent years, COESPU has made significant contributions to the development and rollout of the UN's new standardized and job-specific training materials for individual police officers. Since COESPU's traditional focus has been on FPU training, COESPU trainers first worked to become certified instructors in these materials themselves, and in fact, they were among the first to do so. COESPU has now in turn trained instructors from over a dozen member states on these materials, which has contributed significantly to the global rollout of the UN Training Architecture Program. We know the work being done through our collaboration with COESPU better prepares police peacekeepers to more safely and capably execute complex mission tasks in increasingly difficult operational environments. As climate change escalates as a driver of conflict, we additionally want to recognize COESPU's valuable work alongside other Carabinieri organizations to address environmental topics. Managing the environmental impacts of peace operations is an enduring UN priority and a priority for the United States. Last month, at the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial in Accra, Ghana, the United States hosted a side event on the topic of improving environmental management in peace operations. Italy served as a speaker at this event in recognition of its role as a co-chair of the UN Group of Friends on leading environmental management in the field. The Carabinieri in particular is a leader in this space, and we appreciate its focus on efforts to build partner capacity to manage environmental challenges. As COESPU enters its new academic year, I would like on behalf of the US government to thank COESPU, the Carabinieri, and the government of Italy for your sustained contributions to the mission of global peace and security. And I further extend that appreciation to COESPU's course participants from around the world for both their personal contributions and sacrifices, as well as those of their countries in support of peacekeeping objectives. Working together, we will continue to strengthen UN and regional peacekeeping capabilities and further our shared peace and security aspirations. Thank you again for inviting me to be here with you today. I offer my very best wishes to COESPU for a successful academic year. Thank you.
We have to thank you and the US Department of State for the continued support to the COESPU. $30 million, you said, Madam, 30 millions, which translate into 14,500 students as of today. And great feats await us for next year, because now, as she said, we mark this year 19 years of service for peace and stability across the world, but next year will be the 20th anniversary, so we are thinking about great activities together. So thank you so much. Thank you also for highlighting the issues relevant to climate change and all the environmental related challenges, not only those relevant to the impact of the United Nations mission. So climate change is conducive also to organized crime, terrorism, and the weaponization of everything. So thank you so much. A lot to do together. Thank you so much, Madam, once again.
We should have now UN Commissioner Jun Tang connected from New York City, but it appears there are some connection challenges. So I think we can move on to the Lectio Magistralis by our keynote speaker, Professor Francesco Strazzari. Professor Strazzari is a full professor of political science and international relations at Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies and adjunct professor of international relations at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies Europe in Bologna. Professor Strazzari has an impressive track record of academic publications on terrorism, organized crime and drug trafficking, violent extremism and jihad, migrations, fragile states and insurgencies, particularly in the Sahara-Sahel region and the Balkans. Today, he'll give a Lectio Magistralis titled "The International Order Challenged, New Conflicts and Uncertain Scenarios." Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies, authorities, colleagues, friends. It's really a pleasure, and I'm really grateful for being invited here to try to stimulate some reflection on a problematic landscape that we see in front of us. an uncertain landscape where, as you have heard in the last couple of weeks, even in Europe, a number of ministers of defense have raised and called our attention on the fact that we shouldn't take for granted the condition of peace that we have enjoyed so far, while at the same time new bewildering developments are catching our attention, a race to the moon for exploiting new resources, development in high-tech changing the face of war, and the way in which organized violence takes its toll in our planet. My role today is one of trying to problematize and, if possible, suggest some possible interpretation by looking at the point where challenges can be seen as a system being challenged. So when is the accumulation of challenges, and we're quite used to understanding our global governance in a problematic way, but when do we get to the point in which we ourselves, being here today in such an important place for training, for knowledge production, for good practices, for developing forms of intervention that are geared towards peace and stability, where is that the world we are facing is characterized by tectonics that are shifting to the point where we need to reset some of our cognitive categories for understanding where we are, what we are doing. There's no answer to that, but I'll try to highlight some trends which are problematic and concerning, hopefully to raise the proper questions, if not the answers. Let me start by taking a look at what is the Stockholm Peace Research Institute yearbook, the last one available, providing a picture of the world we live in terms of a growing trend in violence, war, higher military spending on a number of fronts, new technologies and old technologies, climate change, heat waves, disruptive event concerning societal and human security, growing in numbers, in intensity, in pervasiveness, and also international stability becoming, going under pressure as it was not up to many years ago, in terms of what happened for the polarization of the world over the war in Ukraine, and we may add further consequences in terms of dynamics in the Middle East. What you see here are just by very crude data illustrating trends in terms of organized violence, conflict that, I mean, I won't go into the details, but what you can see, they're clearly all going upward. If you take the sequence of years, whether you count the number of armed conflicts, we could discuss what is an armed conflict today, but let's just look at the very simplest statistics, or if we take a kind of sensitive approach to human security, the number of deaths, individual deaths registered, all the numbers in the last 10 years, especially after 2015, which was an annus terribilis for a challenge to our global order, that was the emergence of Daesh and the Islamic Caliphate in the Middle East.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
All the numbers go upward. The last diagram on the bottom shows in darkest color, you see major armed conflicts, and then you see small armed conflict in the lighter color. And then what you see is, sorry, it's the opposite, but you see clearly that all kind of violence is to some extent going upward. This is something that was not the case in the last 20 years. I'm not sure why this is not changing, the slide. Seems to be stuck. Yeah, it's on the side, but doesn't give any.
IT.
I'm using the same button that I was using before. Might be, but if you can, se si riesce a passare quella dopo. Okay, so what I want to show is that the basic number, we can take the data from the IISS, the Institute for Strategic Studies in London. We can take those from peace research, from war studies. It's the same. It all shows some serious worsening in terms of indicators. And I also want to say that when we understand what is an international order, that if you look at the history even of Europe, but the global context more in general, well, we have known different type of political order. What you see in colors is the age of empires, which saw the projection of nation states from Europe elsewhere in the world. What you see in the little box up over there, you see the Versailles system, which is the system that shortly lived in between the two world wars, and which was the one established with the Peace of Versailles when the empires collapsed. What you see in the picture with President Bush under is the proclamation of a potential new world order at the end of bipolarism, at the end of the Cold War. That was at the beginning of the reaction to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. And the date is quite significantly September 11, but 1990, not 2001. We live today in an international order that has been in existence for about 70 years. What you see in the graph in the green line, you see the number of international organizations in terms of membership, how steeply they have been growing, the number of states part of the international net, which somehow channels international action in forms of multilateralism. Our international order has roots in the decision after World War II to create a post-war settlement whereby not only there would be collective problem solving, but also processes, habits, principles that would rely ultimately around the idea of individual freedom, equality, democracy, all the things that we tend to take for granted, especially after the collapse of the Soviet bloc, which was the main contender for a few decades. All those principles of freedom changed over the time during the 80s. This is quite relevant for understanding dynamics in the south of the world. Political liberalism gave way also to economic neoliberalism as a more accentuated form of translation in the economic real, with serious consequences for states' sustainability in a large part of what was then the third world, with states imploding by not being able to sustain their own expenses. So we're basically talking about 70 years of rise of the liberal international order, and then a situation that many colleagues call polycrisis, a number of crises that talk to one another through traumatic events. The 21st century started with, as you know, the attack on the Twin Towers and the whole season of the global war on terror, which ended with Afghanistan back to the Taliban, essentially with a lot of dialogues with different forms of jihadis in an attempt to mitigate the problem, but also the financial crisis of 2007, which was global but emerged in the heart of the financial system in the United States. Also, COVID was a very important, unprecedented challenge for the way the international economy spins around. And you might add, of course, the invasion of Ukraine on the part of Russia as a culmination of tensions, geopolitical tensions that had been simmering for quite some time. Also, you might want to list the somehow problematic response to the Arab Springs, which up to Libya was done in the name of the responsibility to protect, multilateralism, humanitarian form of protection, but then from Syria onward took a completely different twist, with vetoes going back to the UN Security Council, stopping initiatives that would have coercive and a form of the use of force in international relations in a way that is constructively engaging multilateral dimension. So The balance 70 or almost 80 years on is one that becomes blurred. It's no longer the way it was. And if we look at ongoing trends as we speak, we see a number of dynamics which call our attention, and perhaps a number of questions arise. What we see is that we see a lot of what is in economy called friendly reshoring, the idea of reorganizing supply chains in the global economy along friendly countries, allies. We see a number of dynamics of redistributing the logistics of the international trade. We see efforts to contain the way in which China gets access to sensitive high tech with its own geopolitical and geostrategic implication if we talk about microchips, but it's not only a question of microchips. We see China at the same time being able to speed up its integration in the global economy, not only by consolidating its position with the West, but also by expanding its presence with emerging markets and especially the south of the world, with new records in trade. We see the BRICS that was born as a forum with no particular ideological propension growing all the way down to including this year energy-rich countries from the Gulf and also a number of African countries in addition to South Africa. Ethiopia and others are waiting in line. The dynamic of de-dollarization in the global economy, meaning the possibility to pay in national currencies, is making significant change. If you look at the way in which, for instance, Russia, by speeding up its trade with China, and not only that, has been able to, so far, withstand the barrage of sanction that it had to face after the invasion of Ukraine. Yesterday, the IMF has given a prediction forecast for the Russian economy by doubling the expected growth for next year, while, as we know, in Europe, we are seeing a situation of stagnation, to say the least. So, the situation is one with trends that are somehow worrying, especially if you consider Germany at the heart of the industrial world in Europe undergoing technical recession with strained industrial relations. I'm still, okay. The international order, as we know, has been nested upon US hegemony. And hegemony, as you know, is a term that has different facets. One is material. The US is still by far the hegemon if we look at, for example, military spending. Almost 1/3 of the defense budget in the world is paid for by the United States, by international bases, hundreds of bases for force projection. That material dimension is unquestioned. But also if we look at cultural aspects, soft aspect of power, even contendants, revisionist states tend to ape the standards of US films, television, formats, and the world elite still speaks English and sends their children to study in the US because that's the best way to train them, to get them to expect a better life. This, however, doesn't mean that the challenge is not there. If we look at trends once again, we see that in 2023, we saw a number of summits of the Global South, let's call it Global South, India, South Africa, Indonesia, where the pursuance of their own interest met with the creation of consensus on recognizing that the international order is not fair, is not the way it should be. It has becoming increasingly inadequate and unacceptable. Here, it's quite important to look at what India, which is considered much closer to the West than China, for example, has been doing on the question of Ukraine, dodging completely the entire question of sanctions, reorienting its economic strength towards importing hydrocarbons from Russia, and taking positions that are completely not in line with what Western democracies were expecting. China, at the same time, has been able to surpass in its trade with the Global South the trade it has with the United States, Europe, and Japan altogether. So there are trends. If you see the picture there, the first three balloons in a projection to 2050 are the 3 richest countries in the world. The first is China, the second is India, the third, the blue one, is the United States. The others are Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, Japan, Germany. France comes after, Italy comes way after, number 12. So the G7 in a couple of decades won't be the one we have here if those trends continue. What does it mean? How do these figures tell us something to expect about those tectonics of power and resources for the future? Well, here we have 3 conflicts that tell us something. I mentioned already Afghanistan. After 20 years of effort, a lot of contribution coming from different countries, including Italy. The expenses for Ukraine and the question mark about rekindling aid to Ukraine right now, with problems also at the apex of the state in relation between the president and the head of the army. We see that there are shortages on the West and not on the part of Russia, at least in this moment. Then things might change in the next few months. But it depends on what happens with elections. It depends on what happens with Congress passages in the US and in Europe. We see South Africa challenging a number of those positions, including on the question related to the situation in Gaza. South Africa was hardly staying in line with Western democracies, South Africa being a democracy, coming from a history of liberation from apartheid, on Ukraine, and yet denouncing double standards in dealing with the question in Gaza. And related to the situation in Gaza and everything that goes in terms of the massive humanitarian crisis, there are 2 areas of very strong concern in terms of regional and perhaps global order. One is about maritime traffic, the question of the Red Sea, and the tension around the Yemen Houthi-held government, where strikes are becoming a bombing campaign, and who knows what might follow. There you have the question of the role of Iran, of course, and the strategy pursued with Iran by the collective West, but also the question of what is happening in Iraq, Syria, and with the last attack in Jordan. That is that going to compromise the coalition to fight against ISIS? You have seen ISIS is somehow back resurgent in a number of scenarios. In Africa, it hit for the first time with the Vilaya Turkiya. It hit in Turkey, a Catholic church, on Sunday. So there are symptoms there of something going on. And if the situation there is one where the global coalition is put in a situation, is cornered somehow, well, there might be implications as well. So all of that sits ultimately on democracy. We know democracy is crucial for global peace, if nothing else, because I'm speaking as a political scientist, we know it's almost statistical that democracies don't fight democracies. This is something on which there is robust evidence. So if we live in a world with more democracies, as we expected to happen in the 90s, well, then it means that will be fewer wars, at least wars of the classical type, going up in magnitude and in intensity, escalating into vertical and horizontal spreading. But if democracies start suffering from problems in rule of law, respect of rule of law, media freedom, electoral contestation of results because of allegation of fraud, and this doesn't regard any longer just the developing world, but it goes into what happens in Europe, in other parts of the world, including in the United States a few years ago. Well, if that is the situation, we might witness a world where democracy is more fragile. And here I'm quoting US President Biden about the fragility of democracy and how much we need to care about democracy. The string of coup d'etat in Africa are nothing but a kind of after effect of problems that democracy is facing worldwide. We have here the flag of CEDEAO, ECOWAS, 2 days ago, 3 countries upon which the collective West made a huge effort. Mali first, then Niger and Burkina Faso left ECOWAS, and creating an empty space where we don't know exactly what will come next. So what happens with the democratic peace? Here's my conclusion, which comes in a form of questions. Well, I'm quoting here an Italian thinker, Antonio Gramsci, who died in prison in dark times, where he says, the old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born. Now it's a time of monsters, the monsters of our reason, the kind of the moment where we don't know exactly what is happening. What is clear is that wars and human insecurities are at the center of the reorganization of the global economy. And what is clear also as a political scientist is that there are symptoms of power transition at the global scale, but they don't follow a track that we see from the past. There is no other power clearly emerging, clearly ready to take leadership. The BRICS are not a power. They are enemies and rival about everything. India and China even ended up with lethal incidents on the Himalaya, killing one another without weapons years ago. There are rivalries in Latin America. There are rivalries between Islamic countries and non-Islamic countries. You know, you could name how many. It's not a political bloc, but it signals a problem in terms of global order, a misalignment in terms of global order. Some colleagues, some historians have spoken about centrifugal multipolarism. We see the emergence of new poles, but they don't go in the same direction. So what could we expect? Should the collective West and democracies try to reassert their role vis-à-vis the rest of the world through the idea of primacy, domination, unity of purpose, or should there be new ways of recognizing existing hierarchies and restoring a form of multilateralism that takes serious what the rest of the world is telling us? Are we going to have a situation where the North, meaning what remains advanced economies, democracies, are challenged by the South, which is emerging at a vibrant pace and with a vibrant rate? What kind of vision of peace do we have for the future? Well, I think, and I'm speaking for my community, and I close on this note, we need to study more peace. There's a lot of studies on what causes war. There's a lot of studies on how war is changing. There's less studies about what causes peace and what we can think of as peace in the future. Is peace just order, singular, or it can be coexist with different orders which find a constructive engagement with one another, where basic rights and basic human security standards are respected? I think this is where dialogue should probably move. Thank you very much.
We have restored connection with Commissioner June Tan, UN Deputy Police Advisor and Deputy Director of the UN Police Division. Commissioner Tan, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues, and dear Director of COESPU, dear General, and distinguished colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry for the connection issue. So anyway, I'm here now. So
Commissioner, please wait, because we cannot hear you. Just a moment, please.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, please continue.
Sorry for the connection issue. Good afternoon, dear Director of COESPU and dear General and distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to join you for this opening of COESPU academic year. You know, the United Nations Police have enjoyed a long-standing and very productive relationship with COESPU, including your valuable support in neighboring the UN Police Day during the conference of the International Association of Peacekeeping Training Center last November in Kenya. As you may know, the UN police are often among the most visible representatives of the United Nations in the countries where we deploy, with an authorized strength of about 8,000 women and men from more than 19 countries serving on the front lines in United Nations peace operation. Through our history, the UN police have proven time and again to be essential to multilateral efforts to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflict. And we are a key enabler of the Secretary General's Action for Peacekeeping, or A4P and A4P Plus initiatives. So currently, in the high-risk areas where we deploy essential peacekeeping capabilities, such as protective equipment, communications, situational awareness, mobility platforms, effective pre-deployment and in-mission training, and technological skills can provide the flexibility that empowers our UN peacekeeping operations. So I want to see that regarding the safety and security of peacekeepers, A4P and A4P Plus underscore that the success of peacekeeping depends on the collective commitment of all stakeholders to better prepare, train, and equip uniformed personnel through innovative approaches, including stronger partnerships. So we have our action plan in place, which has been updated to its fourth iteration. We will continue to structure those efforts to enhance the safety of UN police and also UN peacekeepers, which is also one of the key pillars of A4P Plus. To this end, we have discussed emerging good practices and lessons during the course for formed police unit coordinators and trainers, like the one hosted by COESPU last December. For this discussion, the purpose for this discussion, we want to create a mobile training team comprising UN trained and certified instructors for limited deployment to peace operations and some emerging peace contributing countries. Of course, we also need to improve the performance and accountability of our missions. As of now, all peacekeeping operations have mission plans or comprehensive planning and performance assessment system we call CPAS in place. They have integrated planning units consisting of civilian, police, and military planners. Our effort to strengthen and enhance joint planning must continue. In police division, we have performance task force to enhance ONPOD's performance, in particular to refine its performance evaluation systems for all categories of personnel from pre-deployment through post-deployment. We also need to verify and also analyze in-mission assessment findings, and also we need to engage with member states on some shortfalls in terms of equipment and other issues. We will also continue to assess our UN police performance against objective norms and standards based on the Strategic Guidance Framework for International Policing, we call SGF, and supported by the UN Police Training Architecture programs. I would like to point out that COESPU has been invaluable in this development and continued implementation of those initiatives. I also hope the upcoming UN Certified Instructor Development course at COESPU in this March will be another example for such successful cooperation. The UN Police Division and the Integrated Training Service also are looking to work with our police training centers of our member state, UN agencies, funds and programs, and other partners organizations such as COESPU to form a network whereby the use of these existing facilities and personnel and other resources can be further rationalized to better meet the needs of peace operations in the field at either zero or almost no cost. In this regard, I'm very glad to see our COESPU colleagues online join our last meeting on this light coordination mechanism for police on 25 January. So again, the police division will also continue to work with our international counterpart and member state to ensure that the right persons are trained on the right things in the required quantities at the right time. This means we need personnel will be deployed in their specialized role, having been earlier trained, and the performance can be monitored, evaluated, and reported against transparent, known, and common agreed criteria. Also, we hope the feedback will become more meaningful and relevant, and some improvement to either guidance or training can be shared across the entire network of the training centers. Of course, our also to share with our partners as well as as a system-wide update. So, ladies and gentlemen, collective effort is required to address current challenge, while we also need to remain vigilant to evolving a situation. We must always strive to explore what more can be done by the UN police, also our member state and partners to protect our peacekeepers in the service of the global community. I also hope what you gain or learn during this academic year will help all of you contribute more to this dialogue. Let me conclude by saying that ongoing support and collaboration of member states and the strategic partners like COESPU is essential to maximize our individual and collective relevance and impact on this ground. So very much thank you for all the colleagues. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Deputy Police Commissioner. Thank you also for highlighting the need to keep certifying trainers. COESPU is one of the top-notch entities on this because, as you know, we have 11 already UN certified instructors, and we will certainly certify other trainers here to support as best as we can the UN mandate and the UN Police Division effort. So thank you, sir. I don't know whether you can still be online for a couple of minutes for the closing remarks. For sure, our regards to the team on the other side of the pond. We cooperate a lot through VTC, albeit online sometimes, but also personally. So there are really strong bonds between the COESPU team and your team. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
The Director of COESPU, Brigadier General Giuseppe De Magistris, takes the floor for the closing remarks.
So last standing man between the conference and the coffee break. With no device working in front of me, so I will improvise it. It's far better. So I will also wrap it up, sir, since you took the floor at the beginning, you declared open as the academic year. A year that is very challenging for us because it's the year before the 20th anniversary. A year that will see the center working hands in hands with the NATO Stability Policy Center of Excellence. Luigi, thank you for being here with part of your team, a part of your senior national representatives, as well as the European Gendarmerie Force, Marianne team present here as well. So this makes the International Stability Policing Hub, for us, is crucial, and I'm very happy to see also the students from the Pigafetta Lyceum, Bravi, for being with us today, because we are talking about cooperating also with you, not only with the academy and the academia and the universities. the General Galletta listed 19 different universities cooperating with us. That coupled with also with the university that cooperate with the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence make a huge academia stronghold which is capable to provide us with an awful lot of support. So my gratefulness goes also to those online who follow the event, but also to the other universities that they are not represented here. I should have something working in front of me, but it's not working. Anyway, still improvising, sir, but University of Trieste and Trento are on the top, amongst the top of our supporters, and you have seen, you were very pleased as well, the presentation of both Sara and Isabella, from those two universities. And then also University of Padua is one of the most ancient universities in Europe, 802 years. Liliane, my intern at the time of the NATO Stability Policy Center of Excellence. They outlined several very challenging subject matters. Sarah spoke about child protection, which could be, if it goes underestimated, really a big issue. Think about child protection, but think about children armed conflict. So it's not just protecting children from being harmed, but having children as an enemy, as an opponent. So don't underestimate these issues, not just that fancy only because we talk about protection of civilians. But can you imagine that the Geneva Convention, the fourth protocol of the Geneva Convention dates back to 1949. The first action we were taking in 1989, 40 years later. The international community should be more proactive, I will say. And Isabella spoke about the weaponization of cultural property as my mantra. Nowadays, Professor Stazzari, as you highlighted, there is the weaponization of everything. As also Liliane spoke about, traffic of human beings. Everything can be weaponized by our opponents. Everything can be weaponized by those who fight the international rule-based order below the threshold of war. It's not only hybrid warfare, Luigi, isn't it? Stability policing, bringing the police dimension into military operation is very active, but does it suffice? We need the academia on board. We need to develop research. And this is what we do in this hub. And also the COESPU is spearheading this initiative because we want to do more research, because we need to delve into the lesson learned. And this is why, sir, we propose the United Nations Police Division to work a lot more on lesson learned, because this is something which the international organizations are lagging behind too much. Thank you to, I will say, Mrs. Jennifer Pulliam as well, remembered. And thank you to the US. Joe, you are representing CETAF here. 30 million euros in 18 years so far. 30 million. Conducive to 14,500, more or less, plus or minus trainees. So it's a lot. Let's say that we are on the verge of this endeavor to train, to support the international community to bring about peace and stability and long-term development. I have to praise again Professor Bartolini and Dr. Branca about their dissertation. You reminded us, Professor, Inus events, Srebrenica for instance, but also the responsibility in Haiti, which is again on the verge, on the rocks, I would say, and nobody is stepping in, because you know that Kenya has got some issues to deploy because of the setback of the High Court, which prevents Kenya police to be deployed overseas for the time being. So the international community makes mistakes. How can we prevent these mistakes? Is it that easy or not? Because we have competing interests, we have competing countries, and there are democracies, but also authoritarian regimes, as it was mentioned. So kudos to you, very intriguing, and I trust that you will be working a lot with us and also with NATO International Legal Conference soon in early next April. I would like to say that to implement your fascinating thinking, there is a need of huge political commitment, though. And I don't know whether authoritarian regimes are so willing to be like-minded as we should. That said, I mean, I will just wrap up saying thank you to Professor Strazzari. I mean, his keynote speech was outstanding, and it's not me to say so, but I mean, it was self-explanatory. We cannot take peace for granted. We must not. Some time ago, I read that there were 29 conflicts worldwide out of 196 countries. We should add one, so 30, which makes 60 countries at least out of 196. Again, this is self-explanatory. More wars, increase spending on weapons, increase acute food insecurity, instability. So it's crucial for us to keep working in this remit in order to prevent state-based violence, as you said, or non-state violence as well, because non-state actors are very, very, very active, unfortunately. Again, fighting or jeopardizing our rule-based international order below the threshold of war. So can we talk about Professor Strazzari international order or international disorder? Isn't it? Then it's crucial to focus, as we do in this hub, General Galletta, on human security, which is not just protection of civilians, children armed conflict, or protection of children, but it's also cultural property protection, Isabella. It's also trafficking human beings, Liliana. But it's also building integrity, fighting corruption, fighting any forms of crime. So now the system is working, but I will not go through the entire presentation. Now I understand why it was switching off. It's very tricky, so it doesn't work. Anyway, I would say that now, to those who are here, to those who are following the event online, it's time to keep pushing, to keep moving forward, because we must be thought-provoking, as it was Dr. Branca. We must be willing to bring about peace and stability. We can do it all together, but only by moving forward in unison. We will be able to make the difference. So keep supporting the COESPU. For those who are amongst the alumni, keep wearing the COESPU pin. Keep supporting the endeavor of the Carabinieri and the Italian government in bringing about peace and stability, thanks to the support of the United States as well, once again, under the United Nations aegis. So good luck to anyone. Godspeed to each one of you. And please wait a couple of minutes, because I would like to present, with the permission of General Galletta, a small token of appreciation to our guest speakers and to our keynote speakers. Thank you so much.
The authorities will now leave the hall. Please rise.